I'm glad we were standing during that song. That's the oddest song to sing, song leaders, when you're sitting down, okay? So just remember that, right? But 1 Peter chapter 2, love for you to join me there. I told you last Sunday that I told Chastity the good news was we only had 3 kids. The bad news is the third one's sick. Well, I forgot that she and I could have a turn too. So it's her turn tonight. And so keep her in your prayers if you will. She's had a month of it here with the kids and now herself. So 1 Peter chapter 2, we began a series of paragraphs in this epistle on the same topic. I just wonder who else would have come tonight had I said this morning, we're going to talk about one of the S words tonight, right? Reckon that would have aroused any interest? It's a big S word, though. It's an important one. And it's the word submission. When we sing songs like, I stand in awe, do we stop and ponder just how important it is that we are in the presence of the Almighty God? Do we stop and think for a moment about how significant submission is? When I look at my Bible at 1 Peter chapter 2 and verse 13, be subject. When I look at my Bible in 1 Peter chapter 2 and verse 18, be subject. When I look at my Bible at 1 Peter chapter 3 and verse 1, be subject. When I look at my Bible in 1 Peter chapter 3 and verse 7, likewise. When I look at my Bible in 1 Peter chapter 3 and verse 8, finally. All of those words tell me that what happens in verse 13 is connected entirely to verse 8 of chapter 3 and perhaps further, but at least to verse 8. Because Peter is wrapping up there in verse 8, finally. Now, what I hadn't figured out how to do is cover all of this in one lesson. So you're going to get 2 or 3 here, and you can thank me later for that. But the idea is the same all the way through. And it's that one key word, submission. I'm just going to be honest with you right out of the gate here. I don't pick these books at random for no reason. I believe that one of the greatest detriments, this is my opinion, but I believe that one of the greatest detriments to us as a people is the lack of submission. And it starts at the top and comes all the way down, but I want you to realize that for me tonight, where the rubber meets the road is at home. I'm telling you that we've got a problem, as I see it, from the top of society all the way down, but I want to go to the foundation of what I see to be the issue, and that is submission at home. And I realize that chapter 3 is going to talk a great deal, especially the first 7 verses, about the relationship between husbands and wives, and I'll save most of that for next week. But I'm telling you that the Bible still teaches. I'm not a wife beater. I'm not a woman hater. I believe women deserve rights. I'm not out to try to hold women as second class. Women, do not burn me at the stake after this lesson tonight. What I am simply saying is that the Bible still teaches what the Bible teaches. And if it was good for the first century, it's good for the 21st century. And if God has a plan, if a woman does the same job as a man, does she deserve the same pay? Absolutely, 100%. I'm all for that. What I am not for is us just throwing the Bible away and saying that men and women have the same role in the eyes of God. Because that is not scriptural. It's not biblical. I want to be as fair as I can be, and I understand I have to be really careful with this because I stand in a position that most of you do not. I have a homemaker at my house. Do I think it's a sin for a woman to work outside the home? Absolutely not. But I'm just saying to you that I'm admitting that I'm walking on eggshells here, but we're talking about submission. And if the Bible says it, then it says it, whether you or I like it or not. And if it's the truth, it's the truth. Now, it starts there. Watch me here. It starts there in that relationship, husbands and wives. And then it goes into the next relationship in the home that we see so awfully today, parents and children. My wife's in a TJ Maxx store just last evening. And she says, oh, it's about a 7-year-old kid that's just really the parental guidance for this child is up toward the front of the store. She's back here, and she says, I get into this, there's some stuff down low, and so I'm kind of hunkered down, and this little 6-7-year-old kid's been running all through the store, and finally he comes down her aisle and he says, get out of my way. And it startles her. And she says, excuse me? And the little boy says, get out of my way. And she knows not this child from Adam, right? And so she begins to try to say to this child, could you say please? Maybe a little politeness here. I just use that to illustrate the lack of submission. This child doesn't understand, although my wife is a complete stranger, it matters not. Or if my parents had heard me say that to anybody, whether we knew them or not, whether they was the same social status of us or not, whether they was the same skin color of us or not, it didn't matter if they were older than me. That was all that mattered. I was to be in submission. And so therefore I was to use my manners, right? You kind of grew up in that world too, didn't you? And it's called submission's what it's called. It's called teaching a child that you are not the head honcho, and you are to love and respect those who are in a position of eldership, meaning older, whether you know them or not. But we're losing that in our society, parents. And so now we've just told ourselves, well, we're living in a society of entitlement. Find entitlement in the Bible for me, would you? Find entitlement. Find in the Bible where you and I deserve anything. And if you find it, it'll probably be something you don't want to see. You might lose your argument real quick. Because if we start talking about what we deserve, but yet what we find is that we've got a generation coming that don't understand. It's submission is what it is. In my mind. You can call it a lack of discipline. You can call it a sports society. You can call it a rich society. You can call it whatever you want to call it. At the end of the day, for me, it's a lack of submission. It's a lack of acknowledgement that this person is in a position of authority to me, even simply something as a child to an adult. And then how much further you want to go? And ultimately, it all goes back to God, right? And so when you have a country who doesn't recognize God, when you have leadership that doesn't recognize God, when you have CEOs and company bosses that don't recognize God. And it amazes me. I've started hearing this at my house. Maybe you've probably heard it at your house a bunch, but I've just started hearing this at my house. I cannot wait to be a parent. I just started hearing that at my house recently. What they don't realize is that even though you're a parent, you're still subject to others. Just because you get to be a parent don't mean that all of a sudden I don't have to submit to to anyone. And then I think about very quickly passages like Philippians chapter 2, where there are people living in our world today who don't think they have to submit to anyone. And according to Philippians chapter 2, when Jesus appears, there will be everyone. You read the passage. There will be everyone that will submit. So we can either get submission right now, or we can realize we missed it too late when the Lord comes back. It's up to us to decide. But for me, it just boils down, and it's again, it's fascinating. No, it's not fascinating. It's providential. It's divine that Peter's writing about a topic 20 centuries ago that we're struggling with today. Submission. What does he say about it? Well, verse 13, be subject for the Lord's sake to every human. How many? All of them. Right? Be subject for the Lord's sake to every human institution. It can be the emperor who's supreme, or it can be the governor who's punishing evil. I don't, all of them. In other words, when there is a human institution that is in place in a position of authority, you submit. You say, well, I don't like my boss. Well, if you're going to continue to work for him and be a Christian, then you're going to have to learn how to submit. I don't mean participate in his or her wrongdoing. That's not what the Bible's advocating at all. But you're going to have to learn how to respect them in the position of authority that they're in. Read Romans chapter 13. Have you read it lately? Every institution, even the government itself. Romans chapter 13 and verse 1. And therefore we are to submit. We are to be subject. We are to submit ourselves, to put ourselves under in a position of servanthood to those that are serving over. We could talk about submission in the church with the way the Lord organized His family, with the elders being the shepherds, being the leaders, being the examples. And you and I are to submit. Again, it's submission. It's all around us. Why is it that people are acting so violently and so outrageous? Well, in my mind, it's because they believe they don't have to submit to anyone, including the law. So we just do what we want to do because I'm the authority, right? It's about me. It's about what I want. And so my job is to, Jimmy Dryden asked us today in the leadership meeting, is it about serving or is it about being served? And what's happening is that we're throwing submission out of the way, and so now you need to serve me. And we are losing the very core of Christianity in my mind, servanthood. Being a servant. What is being a servant about? It's about submission, isn't it? It's about being subject. I understand what Peter and John said in Acts chapter 5. I got that. And we're going to obey God rather than men. And so if man asks us, I'm not asking you to violate that in any way. But as much as possible, as I can submit, until you give me a reason not to submit, to where I have to choose God over the human institution, then I'm going to choose God. But until that point, God is asking of us to be subject, for the Lord's sake, to every human institution. They're there for those who do evil and to reward those who do good. For this, verse 15, is the will of God. Remember Jesus' prayer, model prayer, Matthew 6 and verse 10? Your will be done. Your will be done. God's will be done. This is the will of God, that by doing good you could put to silence the ignorance of foolish people. Now I got to be honest with you. If being subject, if being submissive, If putting oneself under the leadership of another would put to silence foolish people in the first century, I think it would dumbfound people in the 21st century. I mean, just render them speechless. It'd be like, wow, what planet did you come from? Right? We don't act like this around here. No, it's about me. It's about what can you do for me. It's about how can you serve me. It's about how can I get ahead. Not about what can I do for you. How can I be a blessing to you? How can I show respect and honor to you? And so, those famous words, right? Please and thank you. Or maybe, yes, sir. Yes, ma'am. Pretty simple stuff, isn't it? Don't you realize that would rock society today? It causes people to turn their heads. I just had a woman do it the other day, and trust me, I am a long way from being anywhere close to a good parent. But I got an 18-month-old who knows how to say thank you. And the other day, at the table, we handed him something, and the waiter goes, "What did he say?" Well, he said, "Thank you. It's easy. You can do it too." But it literally dumbfounds people, because when's the last time you heard thank you? Right? What words are you going to teach a child first? Well, maybe please and thank you ought to be the first two. What do you think? Submission. Submission. Folks, I'm not telling you anything you don't know. I'm just reminding you of the devastation that's going to come if you and I don't recognize the importance of this S word. Submission. That Peter's writing about here. So that we can put to silence. Live as people, verse 16, who are free. Don't use that freedom to cover up evil, obviously. But live as servants of God. Everything you do. Every way you conduct yourself. Every reaction, every code of conduct, every bit of business dealings, every bit of partnerships, every relationship you have is all conducted under the umbrella, I am a servant of God. I think about when James began his letter in James 1 and verse 1. He refers to himself as a servant of God. Paul, when he begins his letter to Titus in Titus 1 and verse 1, he refers to himself as a servant of God. What are you and I? Are we servants of God? Servants. If we are servants of God, then what does that relationship look like? Peter says, I want you to live that way in verse 16. Now listen to verse 18. Servants, be subject. So it's like in verse 16 he says, here's how I want you to live. Now here's how you do that. Of course, verse 17's got those 4 imperatives there that close out that first paragraph. It's just boom, boom, boom. 1, 2, 3, 4. Honor everyone. Love the brotherhood. Fear God. Honor the emperor. Servants. And be subject to your masters with all respect. Be subject to your masters with all respect. With all respect. Now we're talking about slavery here. We absolutely are. It was in the first century. I realize that it's in our history books now, and I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I'm just saying, we're talking about slaves and servants, masters here. They had a master. How do you act as a slave? How do you act as a servant? How do you submit to your master? And what does that look like as it relates to God? Not only, verse 18, to the good and gentle, but also to the unjust. I've had a few bosses in my life. Some I like better than others. Some I thought were fair. Some I didn't think were too fair. Some I thought that they really rewarded hard work and honesty and integrity. Others I thought, well, you ain't going to get very far with this person if you try to be honest. Not that you don't need to be honest. Not that I didn't continue to be honest. and uphold integrity, but this person's just not that type of person, not that type of boss, not that type of supervisor. What I'm admitting to you is that I've worked for people who were very good, very noble, very God-fearing people, and I've worked for some who weren't. So what do? Well, now to the good ones, it's fun to be an employee, right? But now you bring a bad one in here? Nah, I don't have to listen to him or her. Why? Who gave you the right to do that? Well, they're not fair. They're not just. They're not honest. They're not people of integrity. They don't respect me as an employee. Can I read that verse again? Not only to the good and gentle, but also to the unjust. And then he goes on in verse 19 and says, this is a gracious thing. This is a thing of favor. This is an action that calls God's favorableness to one. Why? Because God is mindful. Literally, God is aware. Because it is in the presence of God. And then you ask yourself a quick question. Where do you go that's not in the presence of God, right? So when you and I show submission, when we show respect, not only to the good, but also to the unjust, it calls to God's favor one who endures sorrows while suffering unjustly. Verse 20, for what credit is it if when you sin and you're beaten for it, you endure? But when you do good and suffer, you endure. This is a gracious thing, same word as in verse 19, in the sight of God. You see, as a slave, you mess up, you do something wrong. Guess what your master could do? He could literally take you out and just abuse you, just beat you. I mean, after all, unfortunately, masters had the right to verbally abuse and physically abuse and sexually abuse. They were the masters. And it happened a lot, unfortunately. And what are you going to do in that situation? Peter's saying, you submit. Well, what if it brings about sorrow? And what if it's unjustly? I'm not going to suffer for nothing. Peter says, what good is it if you do good? You remember what Jesus said in Luke chapter 6? Read Luke chapter 6, beginning in about verse 32 and going down about verse 36. Verse 32. So you act like others act. What good have you? Let's say someone cheats from you and you cheat back. What good are you? Let's say someone does good to you and you do good back. Jesus is asking a series of questions there. Let's say you invite someone just for the purpose of having them invite you back so that they might repay you. What good have you done? Over and over again, Luke chapter 6, verse 32, 33, 34, and 35, the Gentiles do the same. What good are you? What have you proven? You're just acting like normal humanity. But now, let someone do bad to you, and you return good back to them. Luke 6, verse 36. Now you got a horse of a different color. What good is it when you suffer? When you suffer for doing wrong. You did wrong. You deserve to suffer. But when you do good, and you suffer anyway, when you do good and you endure this suffering, you call to attention God, and God will be favorable to that. For to this you have been called, verse 21, because Christ also suffered for you, leaving you an example so that you might follow in His steps. And then he goes on and ends chapter 2 by explaining exactly what Christ has done and why He's done it. He lived a perfect life. He died on a cross. He suffered shame and reproach, disgrace, heartache, sorrow, pain, all for you. Not because He did anything wrong, but because He was the righteous suffering unjustly. Why? Because all you, like sheep, have gone astray. All of us, like sheep, have gone astray. And we needed to be gathered by the Good Shepherd. For to this you have been called. Verse 21. For to this you have an example. For to this you have someone's footsteps that you can follow in. Where are those footsteps? Well, those footsteps are revealed in the pages of Scripture as one who submitted to the authorities, as one who lived by the law, as one who obeyed the law, as one who honored and respected with great dignity and reverence, as one who endured suffering, as a servant, all the while reminding himself, Father, if it's possible, let this cup pass from me, but not my will, but yours be done. That's submission. A perfect example. What is God calling us to tonight? Well, He's calling us to a life of submission. You can call it commitment. You can call it obedience. You can call it faithfulness. You can call it whatever you want to call it. I'm fine with all of those words. At the end of the day, it boils down to the simple core of what I see as the problem in society. What is the core of Christianity? It's saying, I'm not God, but I know who is. It's saying, I'm not the authority, but I know who He is. It's saying, it's not about me, but I know who it is about. It's about God. And I understand my role as a husband, as a father, as an American citizen, as an employee, as a friend, as a family member, a biological family. I understand my role. And no matter how old I get, my parents will still be my parents. And they'll always be older than I. And therefore, I will always be in submission to them. Why? Because I understand my role as a family member. I will always be their son, even though I'm an adult now. As an American, I don't like everything. As a matter of fact, I hate some things. With righteous indignation, I hate some things going on in this country because I believe they're ungodly and they're unrighteous and they're not scriptural. But I'm still an American citizen. I don't participate in the evil that is going on, but I still submit to my government. And I abide by the law as much as I can abide by the law within the bounds of Scripture. Why? Because I understand my role. I'm not the authority here. There is an authority out there. They ride around in cars with these little funny lights on top of them. They're an authority, not me. I submit to them. God is calling us to a life of submission. Are we? Be subject. Be subject. Be subject. Submit. I'm asking you tonight, are you living a life of submission to God? As His child, as a Christian. If you're not, I'm pleading with you to come as we stand and sing.